Thanks for watching myself, Ali, in conversation with George Friend. It's a real treat and a privilege, I think, for both of us to be here. George is, I'm confident in saying, despite having never been to a Statsbomb conference before, has the best left foot that a Statsbomb conference panel has ever seen, and almost certainly the best hair as well. We've been in agreement chatting beforehand, George. There's a lot of quite intimidatingly intelligent people in this building today.
Yeah, I mean, welcome everyone. Nice to meet you all. Yeah, I mean, it's great to be amongst the guys that are behind the scenes more often than not at clubs and different companies. And I think a lot of people, like myself, when I was playing, wouldn't have seen what goes into it. And I think it's incredible. And I also think players and people that worked in football as a player and then go on to management or different things, and those that have been more of a tech and then analyst background, can be threatened by each other. And I think it's merging more and more, and it should marry more as we go forward. And I think it's really important for football that I'm all for it.
Yeah, so the one thing that you have over the rest of them, apart from Steph Houghton, who's here, is a career in professional football, which is what we all wanted. I think I can assume, certainly I did. But a high proportion of people in here, myself included, like if it wasn't for that one injury, right? And the complete lack of athleticism, lack of mentality, any technical ability. But apart from that, we might have had an 18-year professional career like you had, playing in the Premier League, but also in the conference and every league in between. So you've seen an incredible array of different clubs, different leagues, as football has adapted and data's influence has come into the game all through your playing career. You sit here now as Director of Football at Bristol Rovers, and I think you've been in post about 6 months, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Interestingly, you went straight from a playing career into that role. So I'm just wondering how you lived the experience of going from player to decision maker in one go.
Yeah, it wasn't part of the plan. The plan was to sort of build my way up, which would be the logical way to do it. I'm learning a lot of stuff all the time. I'm learning from a lot of people that are in this room. And the best bit of advice I got, which I'm trying to establish at Bristol Rovers, is get people around you that are better than you. And I think that's wise words. I'm trying to do that, and I have done that in certain aspects. And yeah, it's been tough. I had been preparing for it. It's not like I just jumped. I thought, oh, I want to do this one day. The last 10 years I've been preparing for it behind the scenes, whether that's courses or actually actively doing recruitment and shadowing people and getting advice from people going into clubs. But it's great. I've been given an opportunity, get on well with the hierarchy at the club. They've got big plans, and hopefully we can fulfill all those things.
And the second most important piece of advice is buy better players.
Yeah.
Consistently.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll be the best director of football in the land.
Yeah, no, it's the hard part.
We might get back to Rovers and your current role towards the end, and we will hopefully have some time for some questions as well, so bear that in mind as George is talking. But you're the first former professional footballer to speak at this conference, and I think there's a lot of interesting perspective that hopefully you're going to share with the people in the room from what you've seen. I mean, you started at Exeter City. We're talking sort of late 2000s here. Had a really good start to your career and got a move to Wolves. In those very early years, when your academy to first team transition, what role did data and statistical analysis have on you as a young player, young professional?
Well, Exeter in the then conference, as you can imagine, what was it, 2006, something like that, 2007, there wasn't a lot of data going around that the players were privy to anyway. There was certainly certain aspects, and actually Paul Tisdale at the time, who ended up having a very good managerial career, was well ahead of his time anyway, so I'm sure he would have been looking at stuff. But as a player, there was no access. And I do remember one player, so I was out of the squad, I was young then, and there was a more senior pro sat next to me in the stands during the game, and he had his bit of paper, and he had a little pencil like that, and he was just marking stuff like that, and I thought, what is he up to? Like, no, just watch the game. I looked across, and he had 3 people's names, and so I just asked him, I said, but Andy, what are you doing? And he said, I'm marking down everyone that plays in my position every time they don't pass forward. And he was doing it on a bit of paper, and I do look back at that and think, if that's now, he would be able just to log into whatever data platform they have at the club, take it to the manager, because he was doing it to say to the manager on the Monday, I'm out of the team because I don't pass it forward enough. That's what he told me on Friday. I've now marked down a tally of all our midfielders, and they keep passing it backwards. Well, now we could have a whole Statsbomb radar for it. You could go into the manager and show him and say, actually, look at my radar, look at theirs. So yeah, that was really early on, and it seems very primitive. But moving into Wolves, Mick McCarthy was manager. Again, I didn't have a whole load of access to stats. I probably needed to play a bit more to get more minutes to have that anyway. But again, I think a lot of it in the early time was how much they wanted to expose players to it as well. Because if you think back early on with the stats, it was a lot simpler. It was I don't know, passing percentage. But if that's out of context, it's useless really. It was very basic stats back then, in my opinion. So you'd have a midfielder that would come in on a Monday morning and say I had 100% passing success rate, but he never passed it forward once, and it didn't really matter. And then moving on slightly, I'd say when I went to Middlesbrough was when stats really, as players, you really noticed it more impact pre-game, post-game, training. So physical metrics was huge. It's obviously still massive. It was Prozone, I think it was called, that had the cameras in the stadium. That used to pick up all our physical metrics. So different managers used to post them up, or you used to be able to get access to them. And it just evolves through them, really. I can keep going on through the managers, really.
Well, were there some managers that were very quick onto physical data and understanding its value, as a way, in some of their eyes, of measuring things like good old-fashioned British football values like passion and heart and desire, but actually almost trying to put a number to that in some cases? I think some of them did.
Yeah, Tony Pulis was big for that, and he's well known for his style of football, but how effective he is, and an excellent manager. Brilliant for me personally as a defender, but he was just obsessed with the physical data. He used to pin it up on our changing room wall, ranked as well, so you could see who had run more. He used to put the opposition's team's data as well. Some days he'd put a benchmark, so I think maybe it was around the time Bernardo Silva joined Man City, and his running stats were just crazy. And I remember looking, and I could run a lot. I wasn't good at football, I could run, that's why I had a career. So I used to always be up there, and I looked at his and I thought, wow, and he's so effective as well. And it was a good way to measure that, and more often than not, I guess in that Pulis side, when we did outrun a team, we would win. So there was some correlation there. I think it's not the answer, of course it isn't the answer. You could, in the same way, you can have a load of possession and not win a game. So
did it do anything to the dynamic of the dressing room to suddenly have, some of the more top-line stats that would have existed previously, goals and assists and things of that nature? There's obviously a competitive aspect to it, but generally the strikers are going to score more goals than the defenders, so there's not much you can compare with. All of a sudden, you've got a table with all of your names on it, and it's something that's seemingly as simple as basically running. What did that do to the dynamic almost within dressing rooms?
Yeah, I think most players are intelligent enough to work out if I'm a centre-half, I don't need to run as much as a fullback or a box-to-box midfielder. So I think if you've ever been in a football dressing room, it's hard to keep everyone happy anyway, even if all your stats aligned and everything was perfect, there's still disgruntled figures. But yeah, I think earlier on with stats, I think it was dangerous because, like I said before, there's huge bias towards it. And there still is a certain bias, but there was a huge bias towards certain stats, and they could be put in any way that you wanted them to be shown. And that was slightly dangerous earlier on. I think now we're in a different space because everyone's understanding's better, and it's on TV, it's when we watch Sky, it's on all these things. Whereas before it was seen as a real scientific thing within the club. It's everywhere now with social media.
Did you at some point start to have, one-on-one meetings with either a coach or an analyst or someone in that department to talk about your game, your outputs, your own data? Was that not the sort of thing that would have happened to you?
I think through training you would, definitely, on the physical side. I think going into matches potentially, even about your opponent, probably more than yourself, because again, a footballer building up to the weekend can be quite an insecure person. the closer it gets to the game. So the more info you give them on their own stats, especially if they're not quite as high as the player was expecting. I mean, we chatted about the FIFA cards earlier. Yeah. Players now, when they see their FIFA, they're never happy with them. And, you know, I was never happy with I said to you, I was never happy with my pace because I didn't actually look that quick, but I was quite quick in fairness. Towards the end, I wasn't. And I was always lower on FIFA than that. And in your head, straight away, you're thinking, well, that's not fair. They're just judging that off what they're seeing. So now with all the physical metrics you can get, you can actually see how quick people are, meters per second, all of this. And I think when Megan was speaking about how in America they put more stats up on the screens during games, I actually think that now we're in a stage where that would be quite enjoyable as long as it helps the atmosphere and you're not doing it for the opposition team. I think you don't want to say how good someone else is doing, but I played with Adama Traore, who is the fastest man like ever to play football. He really is. Like most of the time he's not even going as fast as he needs to. And if they were to put up on the big screen, Adama's just hit, I don't know, 10.8 meters per second. I think it would, if people have that understanding, everyone in this room does, but if there was a broad understanding, they would understand how seriously quick that is. Yeah. And especially if he's done it after a good action. And that's just one example of perhaps a way it could be used. And you call it Americanizing our game, but let's be honest, with VAR, with everything, we've already entered that.
One of the ways that I like to use data is to understand the profile of a player. So not so much qualitative stuff necessarily, but to use the information available to try and build a picture of, how they might interpret a role within the position on the pitch that they play. And I think fullbacks are really interesting in this sense, particularly these days, what with those lads who are trotting into midfield now, and the things that they have to do are so different to what you had to do. Yeah. And even in your own career as a fullback, there was maybe a more conservative mentality initially, not getting too high up the pitch, and then it almost flipped on its head completely to we want you to be the one getting to the byline and putting in crosses, and we need you to be able to get up and down. What I find really interesting is, you're now involved in recruitment as a director of football, is like, as a fullback yourself by trade, how important would data points be within certain aspects of a fullback's performance? So we could be talking about defensive stuff like tackles won, true tackle percentage, things of that nature. Of course, ball carrying and dribbling ability, which is prioritised in that position at times. And then the physical stuff as well. What are you looking for if you're building your perfect fullback?
Yeah, I mean, we have what we've done at Bristol specifically is put benchmark of certain players we like, so say at our level, and then the real top performers, and try and mirror that. We obviously use Statsbomb. We've got just a general setup. We've got a data scientist, a recruitment analyst who doubles up as a technical scout as well, which I think is important. So he does both roles and sees the games as well and understands that subjective side as well as all the objectives. And then head of recruitment and myself. So there's only 4 of us working all the time, and then there's the manager and his staff. I think when we're looking for certain players and the way football is now, and the talk previously highlighted that actually within a game model and shape now, it's so liquid that you've got to kind of recruit for a few different shapes, a player that can play a variety of positions, depending on how rigid you are in that. I'd say League One, we're not quite fully to that level, although you could argue a Birmingham or something like that is at that stage. So we're looking at all the different KPIs that we set within our model for that position, and then we'll have a type A and a type B for that position. So we'll have 2 different types, and if you're playing wing backs, it's great because you can have one that's like more of a winger, one that's more of a left back, and straight away you can change those shapes. So that's how we're doing sort of specifically. What then gets hard and why you need to go and see them, and this is why I said at the start how important it is that your analyst and your more football person are aligned, because you need the whole package. It's so important. Neither can work without the other one, in my opinion. And I'll give an example. If you're playing for Pulis, because we talked about him, so effective at what he does, the teams know what they're doing, everyone's drilled, but a fullback will often just play that curled ball into the corner. That's what he wants. Does that mean you're not going to sign that player because he can't do the other bits? You have to go and watch him to know what he's about, all the other nuances of his game. There's a story with Pulis. So I think it was we just signed John Obi Mikel, which look. It was at Middlesbrough. We shouldn't have a player of that calibre. He's not at the height of his career, but he's still a very good player. I was absolutely buzzing. What a player. Champions Leagues, everything. His first session, we're doing shape, and I roll the ball inside to him, thinking, brilliant, it's made it to him. That's a good start. He turns on the back foot and just zings the ball about 50 yards, that high off the ground, which obviously you'll know, seriously hard thing to do. And everyone's just stood back and thought, wow, that's brilliant. Pulis has gone, whoa, 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 whoa. John boy, see that plot of land? Just put the ball over in there in that plot of land like that. And that's how he wanted him to play. And that's just an example of what the manager wants you to do. Obviously, John Obi Mikel could still do all these other things because of the type of player he was. But someone like myself, I had that direction just to hit that plot of land. So it's all to do with what the manager wants. And do you know what? That ball over the top was used loads by Klopp with Liverpool. So it's, when I say these stories, it's not about being disrespectful to Pulis. Actually, it's finding out what works. And that ball in behind with quality is actually a harder ball to do than a 10-yard pass. So, I think it's just looking at what the players of the style they're playing in as well. And that's the subjective side, which is slightly different.
Who would you say liked numbers the least out of Tony Pulis, Neil Warnock, and Mick McCarthy?
Says something about my career, doesn't it? Probably who I've played for. But do you know what? I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it. They're all amazing.
I was going to say, let's be clear, these are some of the most successful managers in British football over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and learn so much that isn't just on the pitch, off the pitch as a person. They're all, good, strong men and excellent people, which counts for a lot. And they're the manager types, and that is so important. And I think... man management, ultimately, take all the stats and everything out of it, that is a very important part of football. I don't know, there's all different stages in different years, played more for some than others. I don't think any of them were heavy on the stats for the player, but I wasn't there in their office. I don't want to sound like they weren't using it, because I actually don't know in terms of what they would have been doing with their coaches. I imagine they would have delegated it to, like they rightly should do, to people in the know and taken the information they need. And all they want to do is win. So if it's going to help them, they'll make sure they win. And I'm sure it helped as it went on with their recruitment as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're currently in a role where you will be across and aware of, on top of, your club's data at any given time, from the first day of the season right to the end, and benchmarking and evaluating performance based on that as part of your role. When you were a player, was there ever a point, a season or a club that you played for, a manager that you played under, where you would have been aware of Borough's underlying numbers, for example? Would there have been any point where that would have sort of crossed your radar?
I think when you're in the thick of it, you're just concentrating, I need to play the next game, I need to perform high for the next game. I think it was Instat before. Who bought out Instat recently? Someone did. So this is the first question answer, my first. Hudl, okay, very apt, well done. So Instat, before they were bought out, used to send through to players. And I don't know if I registered for it or if they just found it out, whatever. I used to get my rating and all the breakdown. I remember knowing that actually these stats are very important. I still don't know loads, but I didn't have a clue. And I'm like, I could tell if I'd have a good rating from how I felt after the game. Okay. So it was quite intuitive then, or I would
at least
say so.
in line with
exactly. And sometimes I wouldn't want to open the email because more often than not, I knew it wouldn't be great ratings. But that was really opened my eyes to think, okay, this is obviously going to be very important. And this was in its infancy then. So I think it's developed so much. I wish I'd had more now, looking back, and it would have been great. I think I could have improved my game, improved performance, worked on weaknesses, maybe even helped with deals. The famous ones, Kevin De Bruyne doing his deal based on stats. I think it's only going to go more and more in that sense. But in terms of my actual position then at the club, I think if you're playing well, your stats can look however they like. You're going to keep playing, in my opinion, if the team's winning, obviously.
Is there something in, because of the hectic nature of the schedule, because of how important a strong psychology is for consistent performance. Is there an aspect of really wanting to make sure you find the right balance, even now, but even when you were playing, between getting quality information into a player in order to help with match plans, or whatever the case may be, versus not overdoing it, not filling their head with too much, not necessarily stats, basically any sort of instruction? How do you, is every player different on that front, or is there a kind of best practice in terms of how much you should be drilling into an individual player or in a team meeting setup?
Yeah, I think every player is different, but then you do have a full squad meeting or unit meeting, so breaking up into defenders, midfielders, attackers, whatever. But I think in general, players now want as much information as possible, because that's what they've grown up with social media, with everything. They need the information. So I think you can give a lot more than what it used to be in the past. So they want to see opposition. They want to know what opposition are good at, whether that's through stats, through video. They want to know what they're good at and be reinforced through stats. Towards the end of my career, I was personally subscribing to a stats platform and Y-Scout, because I wanted that for myself, for the recruitment side, but also my own performance side. So it just showed how it changed as it went on. I think a good example, earlier on, when we played Man City, when I was at Middlesbrough, under Aitor Karanka, we saw the Man City team. He put it up. It was a good way of doing it because he didn't overload us with info. He said, they're way better than us. They're going to beat us. If we go toe-to-toe with them, play football against them, he goes, what we've looked at and they're not good at is set pieces, because they never really get challenged. I mean, if you win a corner, it's great. So he goes, if we get set pieces all week, that's what we're going to be focusing on. And he showed us the stats with it, showed us the weaknesses, and then he showed us how to be in a low block, all of that side with the stats. And it's risky, because if they'd scored early, we were done, or if they'd scored at all, we were done. But we did win the game, and it reinforced that the way he had delivered it worked well. And you could see him incorporate it with other styles. Obviously, it's not a sustainable way to go, just sitting back and trying to win always on set pieces. But it encouraged us, and the use of stats involved in that. So what I'd say is, there might be a lot of people who here work as analysts or heads of recruitment, whatever. Like whatever you give your manager, the board, the stakeholders, it's got to be quite defined, quite a small amount and to the point. Because we've got so much data, we've seen today or how much we can grab, what's relevant, and people are simple, and it's how you deliver it in that sense.
Yeah, what do you, for the benefit of prospective analysts, be it recruitment, performance or otherwise, in your current role, when you're managing people in those roles, what are your instructions in terms of what is the most value they can offer you to then go forward and make decisions based off data?
Yeah, I think everything comes down to relationships. That's what I've not just learned in this 6-8 months, been in this role, but previously. Strong relationships are so important, because then you can work out a person, you can work out what they really need, what they like. Some people might want a whole dossier of information, and some people might want one page. Well, I would say in football, you don't have time. There's never enough time. So you need to condense everything, in my opinion. This is at our level. It might be different right at the top. I can't comment on that. But I do think finding out as well exactly what we're aiming for. So it's the board's ambition just to get assets. So why are we delivering stats on all this performance stuff, spending hours on the performance stuff, when we just want to develop these key assets? Like, that's the bit that the director of football, sporting director, everyone will want to be taken back to the board. So it's finding out exactly the specific thing amongst all this data, and you're the experts at looking through the data. It's how you display that and find what the idea of the whole club is, basically. It's the most important thing.
There has been in data's kind of, as its influence in football has grown and grown, certainly initially it felt like one of the kind of pressure points was this idea that, possibly exaggerated or maybe not, that the people who wanted to bring data into the game and the people who were within the game and maybe didn't welcome the introduction of data in the game were constantly clashing, whether that was literally arguing and disagreeing or just struggling to form the sorts of positive relationships that good work comes from. do you think that situation is better now? Do you think, for example, you're talking about how important relationships are. I'm thinking if I'm a young analyst, I might find it quite intimidating, quite difficult early on, perhaps, to have the courage to come and talk to my bosses or other people at the club. And so, do you think the environment is better now in terms of those relationships being able to kind of thrive?
Yeah, it's much better in your likes of Brentford, Brighton, those guys that have shown how successful you can be have really paved the way, in my opinion. I think, the discrimination within football and staff now is complete. It's not there like it was. For me, someone in my role, I believe, and what I'd hope to do, I want to be quite innovative, but I want to bring a coach that's named as a coach, but they are purely data. And I think eventually they will end up standing alongside the manager, the head coach, the assistant, whoever on the bench, and they won't be the guy up in the stand with the camera. Like, they will be part of that coaching team, because that's how important it is. And as technology moves, and a club like Bristol Rovers, we don't have the finances to have all the best platforms, all the best data, but as it moves forward, I think those people are going to be as important as your typical grass coach, and they'll end up being grass coaches as well, because why can't they? I hate the narrative that you have to have played, or all this side of it. It's a myth to me. I think you collaborate together. You need a mix. In the same way you need a balance in your squad, you need a balance in your staff. And I think it's really important. If I had a bigger budget, it'd be dangerous, I'm sure.
I'd be quite keen to take on that role for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't do Mondays and Thursdays, but the rest should be fine.
Can you do Saturdays? That's the main one.
Yeah, that'd be fine. I mean, what you're talking about is there's something similar or maybe exactly the same as that, the coach analyst role, which has started to, a few Premier League clubs have started to dip into that. I know Woody Dewar, for example, at Wolves has that role where he is much more involved than he was in previous analyst roles, and it is, the name of the role is coach analyst to make that sort of more clear, more defined, which I think is, I'm sure, like everything else, that will feed down into the EFL. It normally takes a couple of years. Yeah,
it does, yeah. I think I don't admit to be a tech person at all, but with AI as well, the little I understand about it, as soon as that develops into, it's being used all the time, I know now, but in-game play and decisions for the manager, you're going to have that person with you to make those decisions, because everything, let's be honest, revolves around the results and the money. Mm-hmm. If you can have that upper hand, you're going to have that person with you. It doesn't matter how you get that result, that person is going to have to be there to deliver it to the decision maker at the time.
You're quite open-minded on this stuff. Do you think that you are typical or atypical in being open-minded? Things like AI, and again, I'm guessing, I'm projecting, but those are the sorts of things that turn a lot of people off, and I would assume a lot of people within the game might be turned off by that. I don't know if you ever get together with other directors of football and share war stories and stuff, but if you were to be with a group of people in your role, do you think your open-mindedness to AI and things of that nature would be typical?
I think it's mixed. I think there are teams in League One using AI, so that might come as a surprise. Some people might be in the room that are part of that, I don't know. But I think it is changing, and people that working in clubs will see that now. It's getting that edge, that advantage, and recognising that technology is and the data side is so important. Why wouldn't you use it? That the manager or head coach is trying to keep his job. I'm trying to keep my job but progress the club, make everything successful, performance. So I think most people are progressive now, I'd say. And you see a lot of appointments now. It's under 21s coach, or it's an assistant manager from somewhere. It's someone's first or second job. That's changing as well in terms of those managerial coach roles as well.
Your heart rate too high?
Yeah. Nice,
that's the chairman on the phone.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Stop giving away our secrets.
Stop asking for a bigger budget, you said, yeah.
I'd be interested to know if you could share any egregiously bad uses of data that you've come across in the last few months, because I've, over the years, seen the occasional, something like a player agency putting together data on their player, and sometimes I'm not as smart as everyone else in this room when it comes to putting numbers together, but I can recognise bad data when I see it.
Yeah, I think that some agents put the odd thing together. I think sometimes if they haven't had enough minutes to take from, it's straight away irrelevant. So that's probably some of the worst data I've seen, because you can't take it from, I don't know, 100 minutes, say. It just doesn't work. So,
but is those contextless stats, often in totals as well, rather than per 90, where you're like, I don't know if that was a lot of interceptions or whether that was the worst in the league.
Yeah, I guess I've got to be quite careful, because I probably try and change mine slightly when I'm trying to sign a player. So
right. As in?
Well, I like to use, and that's what StatsBomb's great for in terms of the visuals of it. It's really good because it's easy to understand. It looks good on a presentation. It's someone with very low understanding like myself can work it out, and when I present to a player and his agent, I can show the map. And something I did, which is completely clear, I'm not lying, is showing where they were last season, saying this is how we're going to improve you, and I want yours to cover it next year, and we'll check your radar again this time next year. Or I'll put the best player, who I think the best player in the league is, and overlap it, and that's where you should be aspiring to be. And guess what? That person got a £2 million move at the end of the season because of that. So straight away, it's an easy visual. Everyone in the room's thinking, great, let's do it. That's as simple as that, really. And the KPIs, and you can describe all of them and what we look for in the player. It's changed loads. No one presented to me when I signed for all my clubs. I'd love to have seen that. Probably because I was probably the one knocking the door more than them. But you see what I mean? It has changed a lot. I presented to every player bar one that we signed this year.
Sounds like you're a bit sad that you weren't born 10 years later.
Well, no, because actually the style of football and everything, I think it's...
Would you be inverting into midfield, just popping passes off it? No?
No.
Bit of rest defence?
No, I don't
You'd
think
love that. Guys, we're going to open the floor up to you. I've asked George everything I could possibly have wanted to ask, and just been fascinated to get his insight, really, his perspective of everything that we've talked about. And so much of the stuff we've seen from you today has been unbelievably special, and I hope that in talking to George and in him giving his insight, we've been able to offer something interesting as well. Does anyone have any questions for George? I've seen from earlier that you guys love networking, so I'm sure you're keen to get out there and start pressing the flesh. But if you do have any questions for him, please do raise your hand.
Hi, George. Thanks for that. This is like a transfer-based question. I think for the past transfer market, we've seen in League 1 and 2 more clubs use the ESC permits and go into foreign markets. Do you think that's a trend we're likely to see over further transfer windows in Leagues 1 and 2?
Without a doubt. I think the 2 wildcard spots, I mean, our owners, to put it to context, our owners already said we want to use them going forward. It was probably a bit rushed for us to do that in the summer, but it's something we'll look to do. I think certainly with wages, I think you can be very competitive. It's one of the reasons we took StatsBomb, because we're able to see into different leagues, and that puts an advantage straight away. I told you there's 4 of us in our team. We haven't got a big enough network to go abroad and all this side, so straight away we can look into that and then be agent-led from there on and build connections in that way. But without a doubt, and we've even done studies on which nations, which leagues have been more successful in terms of Leagues 1 and the Championship. So, yeah, without a doubt, it's going to open up the market massively in that sense. And, you can just learn on other successful models as well.
A January signing from the Dutch second tier, then?
Well, potentially. Do you know anyone?
Not for free. Who else have we got? I know that... my old friend and colleague Tom Warville's got something to say.
Which clubs in the EFL, either League 1 or League 2, do you look at kind of for inspiration in your role? So in terms of across scouting, given that's such a big part of being a director of football, is there someone you look at and be like, that's what we aspire to get to in those 2 divisions?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture, because people have different budgets and not everyone knows the exact budgets, but in my role you tend to find out confidentially. So I look at like a Birmingham, it's great what they're doing, but we can't do that. I like the fact that they've signed players that they know can be sustainable for next year and maybe beyond. One example I do like is Stockport. I think what they've done is quite clever, and they've kept a core group together, but they've added really cleverly. Again, probably higher budget than us, but they also mix it up well, so they do have a style, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, but they're also pragmatic in their approach because they know it's EFL football. So I would say Stockport is a really good model and something I've looked over the seasons, and ironically they've actually just come up, I know, but they're sort of ahead of where they should be, and that's great planning, great recruitment, clever budgeting, everything really. So yeah, probably the standout for me is them.
Cool, thank you.
The shadow of Brentford and Brighton is still a long one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, George. When you talked about delivering technical data to players, particularly about like their game and their style of play, how do you see that looking in the next couple of years? What sort of way do you think is the best way to deliver it? And is there sort of examples where you think it's gone really well, or examples where it's not gone really well and not been really well received by the player?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the individual. So when I presented to some, they were like asking questions straight away about it, and others just sort of nodded thinking, where's the next slide? And that could be partly down to me, but I think the very first, the opening presentation we had about how it can go simultaneously into the next thing, so the clip marries in with the data and it's all, in a line. I think that is a really good way of a player seeing the data and how it transforms, and then being reinforced of how they're playing and what they're doing. I think also it's just keeping things simple. So that's the skill of the analyst, in my opinion, is getting the right data for that right person, that individual, that player, and making sure they can see it in a certain way. I don't know. I do think the radars are really strong. I think that every player I showed, they enjoy that because it's clear and you can see clear improvement. And then I think the physical data they're always interested in, because your body is your tool. The better it's performing, the better you're likely to be doing as well in the longevity of your career. So I think physical data could be displayed slightly better at times. And I think that would be something, I don't know how he'd do it, but that would be something perhaps on a similar, if it could go hand in hand, maybe Hudl have worked it out how to show it beautifully. We'll find out.
Was there one more? Yes, there is one more.
Thank you. A little bit off topic with regards to Statsbomb, but can you think out loud about ownership of clubs, like longevity of ownership? A lot of the clubs in the UK, they don't really make any money. So, and as a coach or GM, the more money they have, the better it is. But it doesn't really is sustainable for the long term. But you see in a few NFL teams, and I'm a big Steelers fan, so they owned the teams in 1933, had 3 head coaches in 1969, very successful. And I just have a thinking in my head that a good, stable ownership has to be something, you might not be able to buy the best players in the world, but over time, what do you think about that, basically?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think Ali would have been able to see it with his knowledge of the EFL as well. But there's that classic, like the fish rots from the head. So if the top's not right, very rarely the whole club works very well. But what I would say, there's different ownership styles. So I was fortunate at Middlesbrough for the best part of 9 years. Steve Gibson's from Middlesbrough. He's never going to let that club get into trouble. He puts money into it. He runs it well. And that's why they've always been pretty stable. Should be up in the Premier League in my position, but they're always around there. but then you've got a completely different model like the Watford model, and yet they could call themselves pretty successful because they're always selling players. And then there's I don't know if you know about the regulations that have come in and all of that side of it as well. So there is improvement to make sure no one, a cowboy can't just come in and buy a club. But I think it is getting more sustainable. And to marry in like why we're here with data and stats, there's a lot of predicted data now, isn't there? So owners can be a lot more satisfied and secure that they're going to do well if they invest in certain areas and invest well in them. And I think that's why data is going to be so important for them. I know Birmingham are heavy on that, and they've invested a lot of money in. Look, they're doing really well at the moment, and I actually feel they'll continue to do that because of where they're investing their money, if that makes sense. So I have to say, on the flip side, if it's not your club, I do think fans quite enjoy how volatile it is as well. And whether that's how quickly managers come in and go, but also owners in different clubs and getting into administration, then coming back. We are bad for it in this country, but I think there's a slight enjoyment in it in a bit of a sadistic way.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to myself. But main thank you to George for giving up his time and talking us through it all. So big thank you, George. And yeah, see you guys later.
Nice one. Thanks.